Hey, have you seen my duvet cover?
No. What does it look like?
It's blue.
Have you checked the bottom shelf?
Ah, Neo-Terra Bolts. Didn't even remember I had these. I haven't seen them since the 3rd edition. Guess I won't be needing you guys anymore. In the bin you go.
What are your plans for the weekend?
Oh, you know, just catching up with some friends. Thank you. And we go out for a drink or two, you know, just the usual.
Oh, so how's your Infinity gaming going?
Oh, I haven't really thought about it much lately. I should probably get back to like writing some army lists.
So have you tried building a list with NCA?
No, like I usually play with my PanOceania and I've heard they're pretty terrible, so.
What about Neo-Terra Bolts? They're supposed to be pretty good now.
But like they weren't good before, you know. They were hiding at the bottom of my cupboard, so.
It says they've got marksmanship here now.
Hey guys, VaulSC here. Hope that you're having a good week. Today we're going to talk about the Neo-Terran Capitoline Army, which is a sectorial that you can play. It's one of the PanOceania Sectorials. It has become a lot more interesting in N4, and throughout this video I'm going to break down each of the different profiles you can play. I'll say a little bit about the strategy and the tactics and the list building that you might be going for with NCA, but overall it's become more interesting because of the link team options and because of some of the stats and rules changes. Back in N3, sometimes I would play this sectorial as a really big order spam list with 20 guys in it, a lot of cheap Fusiliers, a lot of bots. The Auxilia teams. Back then, the Alive team with Bit and Kiss was a mercenary unit for a little period of time. But now there's the 15-unit cap, which is kind of okay for PanOceania because they want to take some more expensive stuff. But then the crit mechanics change. We're more into long-range sort of play in a lot of tables. But NCA, with the addition of some options to put your, how shall I put it, so some of your nastier, bigger guns, like the Bulleteer, the Aquila, into a link team, and of course the change to the bolts, which we'll talk about, really makes this faction a bit shootier in a different kind of way. But yeah, I'm being a bit vague. We're going to talk about the actual individual profiles and break it down. If you are a new player and you're just jumping straight into Infinity and you're just taking a look at Neo-Terra Capitoline Army, it's hard really to make a mistake with like purchasing boxes. I mean, I would recommend just going for the remotes, buy like a couple of boxes of the remotes so that you can play them as Flash Pulse bots and Pathfinders and Sierra Dronebot HMGs. Unfortunately, some of the stuff is out of production for some of the earlier boxes. I think the NCA starter set, I'm not too sure if that's around, or the Bolt Special Weapons. But you should quite easily be able to proxy some units as others, and have a look around when you're purchasing your brand new stuff for also secondhand stuff as well, because there may be people out there willing to part with you know, some of the older PanOceania collections, and that may be very helpful when assembling some of the old stuff, especially like the old Bolt miniatures, which you'll probably want now, and maybe some of the Swiss Guards, not too sure. But again, I mean, if you own sets like the Military Orders set, the Operation Cold Front, Operation Ice Storm, they will include models that you're going to be using in NCA, and some of them can be counted as other things. For example, if you have a NIS with a sniper rifle, that could easily be used as a bolt or a Blackfriar or something like that. It's not that much of a big deal if you want to do it that way. So stick with me as we run through some units for NCA. Just going to minimize this a little bit. We'll click on the first one we've got here, Fusiliers, the backbone of the PanOceania army. And one thing that I like about this sectorial is that you have the option of forming a fireteam core around the Fusiliers, or you could do it around the Orc Troopers if you really want, or you could do it around the Bolts, which is going to be a pretty common one. But you can also mix and match some of the new wildcard options, which just weren't there before in N3. The idea behind a Fusilier link team is that it's going to be the cheapest. Fusilier is much cheaper than Bolts and Orcs, obviously. So if you're going that way, that would usually be the reason why. And it's a pretty good reason. It's going to allow you to afford more powerful stuff out in the battlefield performing other roles. So let's take a look at them. Back in N3, you actually couldn't really mix and match your link team, and of course that's been changed and modified, and now there's been a lot of power creep, and you can do that. But if you just want to go Fusiliers, you may want a Fusilier Lieutenant. You may want, a paramedic in there, just because that's a really good way of reviving somebody who joins the link team that gets dropped down. But overall, if you do take the missile launcher, multi-sniper, the HMG, that kind of thing, just remember that they're not going to be as effective as, in terms of being the point man of the team, as being the guy doing most of the shooting, compared to a link that's formed around an Orc Trooper or Bolts, for example. So just be wary of that. My theory here with Fusiliers is that you take 3 or 4 of them, then you add units to them. So we'll be talking about it in a bit more detail later, but if you come down to Bulleteers, they can join the team. So because the Bulleteer can pack your heavy weapon, it can go into the Fusilier team. So by taking those cheap cheerleaders, they are giving the modifiers and bonuses to the Bulleteer who's doing the work, while at the same time generating regular orders. So this kind of setup is very, very efficient. In the same way, when we come to the Aquila Guard, and we'll talk about him later as well, there's an FTO option here, where basically your Aquila Guard can join the team. You could have both the Bulleteer and the Aquila Guard, or just one of them, but by sticking it like this, let's say we get rid of the Bulleteer. If you just have these guys here, so you've just got a bunch of Fusiliers and Aquila Guard, you've not broken 100 points here. You've still got plenty of money, so to speak, plenty of points left for other things. But this kind of makes the sectorial worthwhile. I mean, you always have to think of why you would play a sectorial over the vanilla faction, which can take all of the units, and the fire teams are usually going to be the reason. So here you've got 4 really cheap guys who are generating orders. That's fantastic. And then whenever the Aquila Guard is shooting, it's got +1 burst and +3 ballistic skill, and of course the 6th sense ability. So this is where you're kind of packing a lot of punch. I mean, he's hitting on 18s even if they are in cover, on 4 dice with that multi-marksman rifle, and you've got armor piercing, which is really crucial against tags in the current meta. The MSV3 is a really big deal, so if you're up against something like an Avatar or an enemy cutter, this guy can actually shred that target, which is kind of rare. Also, if your opponent is spamming a lot of mines and markers and bits and pieces, the MSV3 also makes it very efficient to rip through them, and that's something which I feel kind of makes this sectorial worth playing. And you sort of do have to look for reasons, because usually, again, as I said, if you play vanilla PanOceania, you've got access to more stuff. So you can actually add in, a Helot, you can add in a Monstrucker, you can have Joan of Arc, and NCA can't take those cool little profiles, and that's something which is a drawback. That's a negative thing about NCA. So you have to make up for it with a really robust fireteam core, in my opinion. But the humble Fusiliers are one of the ways you can do that. They are not necessarily the best way for you to do that, but if you are looking to save points on other things, like you want to run a tag somewhere, you want to run a lot more midfield stuff, Hexes and Pathfinder, Peacemakers, Locusts perhaps, and you're just running out of points, then it might be cheaper to go with the Fusilier group, add in something beefy, rather than base it around the Neo-Terra Bolts. But you do have both choices, and that's something which I think is really cool about this sectorial. So again, nothing wrong with taking the heavy weapons. If you've got SWCs left, you can give them a HMG missile launcher or a multi-sniper. But again, these guys aren't going to be the most effective with those guns if we're comparing them to what the other options in the sectorial are. You could have an Orc Trooper holding the gun, a Bulleteer, or an Aquila Guard, or a Neo-Terra Bolt. The Fusiliers really aren't the best option when it comes to actually holding down that fire lane or active turn trying to rip out an enemy ARO with long-range shooting. They're still good, it's just they're not your best choice. The purpose of the Fusiliers are to keep the list cheap, like to keep the fire team cheap. The list is always going to be 300 points, but it really reduces the cost of the overall team, and that's why you'd run with Fusiliers.
Neo-Terra Bolts. There were a few things wrong with them in the last edition of the game, N3. However, the designers decided not only to fix those things, but to give them an extremely powerful rule that they did not deserve. But I'll take it. Whatever it takes to make more of the bad guys die horribly. So first of all, the movement update from medium infantry means they can go in a fire team and keep up with other troops, which is really important for moving out later in the game. Yes, kitty. Secondly, Infinity isn't about getting as many units on the table as points will allow anymore, so the fact that they are a little more expensive than normal line troopers isn't as much of a problem. Then, of course, there's the marksmanship. That's where they really shine in NCA. You're starting at Ballistic Skill 13. Then, if you put them in the 5-man link team, you get the +3 to that, putting you on 16. Normally your +3 for range is cancelled out by the cover bonus that the enemy will usually have, but marksmanship ignores that modifier. So you're ending up needing 19s to hit. That's on 20-sided dice, so it's pretty good. Sometimes your target will have mimetism, and that's why the sniper loadout is the #1 pick here. Having MSV1 on top of everything we've just talked about is really killer. Stacking all of those bonuses just turns your bolt sniper into an absolute machine. Yes, it does. The missile launcher is a bit cheaper, but it doesn't have MSV1, and also the range band on it is a bit clunkier. I would avoid this profile, bearing in mind you want your gun to be used in the active turn as well, and the sniper even gets an extra dice when it's your turn. Yeah. The specialist options all suffer from that awful willpower 12, but I think the chain of command guide can be really worth it, especially if you want to use a lieutenant that will do a lot of fighting in the front line. If you're not relying too heavily on bringing a Bulleteer or Aquila Guard into the team, the Spitfire can really be really nice because of the reasons we just talked about with marksmanship. It's really brutal hitting something on 19s when you're throwing all 5 dice. Woohoo! Lastly, don't forget about the drop bears on the basic profiles. If you're trying to add a few cheaper members to back up the other heavy weapons you might be using, these guys can really come in handy when you've moved out and set yourself up to the middle of the table. The link bonus can really help you land the mines where you want them, and suddenly the position you set up is a lot harder to approach.
Moving on now to Orc Troops. So the thing about these guys is that by themselves they are not particularly good, and I'll just say that just because if you think about context in this game, there are going to be a lot of other troops out there that just are able to beat them thanks to mods, and you're spending orders on these guys and not really getting a lot done efficiently. If you take one Orc Trooper with a HMG or a multi-rifle or whatever it might be, and you're encountering something with mimetism -6, or something that's in a link team, or a tag, the Orc's just not going to efficiently power it down. But when the Orc himself is able to join a link team, that's when sometimes you might find him useful. And he's actually got Harris as well as Fireteam Core. I wouldn't recommend taking an entire link team of these guys, because as you can see, it just gets expensive really quickly. And you end up with such a weak list overall, because everything else you take ends up having to be kind of compromised. So, under what circumstances would you actually include Orc Troops in NCA? My thinking is that you take just one of them and you form a Harris or Fireteam Core around that Orc Trooper by bringing in a lot of wildcards. So let's say you've got this Orc HMG, you can then go looking for other troops which can wildcard into it. So we go to Indigo Richard Quinn. He's 23 points, not as expensive an Orc Trooper, so the team's staying relatively cheap. He adds the MSV1. Then you go down to Shona Carano. She's only 27 points. She's really good in close combat. Add something to the team that you didn't have previously. Come over to the Bulleteer, we pop in maybe heavy shotgun. So again, 17 points, very, very cheap. Overall team is, relatively inexpensive, and we do it like that. We could even go to, for example, Blackfriar. That can join pretty much any team as well. So you grab the one that can join the team. I think it's this one. Albedo Biometric Visor. And you still got an extremely expensive team, but it's just a lot more effective than having 5 Orc Troopers, in my opinion. In terms of NCA, I personally would rather run a group of Bolts or Fusiliers rather than base it around the Orc Trooper. But again, the other thing you can do is have him as a Harris. So we take out that, we take out, I don't know, Richard Quinn, and then we've got this much smaller Harris team, which suddenly feels a bit more efficient. We've got the Orc Trooper, he's got +1 burst for long-range shooting, so BS14, burst 5, that's going to be very helpful. Then as we walk through the middle of the table, the Bulleteer has the shotgun, which can obviously trade very well with things at close range. And then there's Shona Carano, who has just moved up with the team as a result of the other movement anyway, and she's then into position to use her close combat ability. So that's where you can get a little bit more tactical with your little Harris, and that's where I think the Orc really shines. There are a lot of versions of NCA lists, I think, which don't include any Orc Troopers whatsoever, and that is perfectly fine. If you are going to be using an Orc, let's just talk about the profiles that I think I would recommend. So, building a link team around the guy with the HMG is always good, just because he's high ballistic skill, good armor, 2 wounds, high burst. That's exactly what you want for taking down an enemy ARO piece. Some people like the Feuerbuck because he's a bit better at providing the AROs because it does more damage. Usually you want to be emphasizing the ability to win the face-to-face rolls more so than how much damage you'll do, because really that swing between losing and winning a face-to-face roll is everything, so extra dice is more important. But if you are just going to primarily be shooting back at the enemy in your reactive turn, the Feuerbuck is better for that. I mean, you could take the boarding shotgun with the firewall if you're going to be doing what I said earlier about having a large group, but again, the points you're spending just for that benefit, I'm not really sure if I love it. There are other things at close range, like the Bulleteer, which can just as easily pack the boarding shotgun, and honestly, if the enemy's got some way of hacking you, the firewall -3, I don't know if that's going to make enough of a difference, really. You're probably going to be in trouble if they've got some really powerful hacking going on. I will point out as well that you have access to the Varuna and the Winter Force versions of the Orc Trooper. Just think about whether you particularly need Climbing Plus or Stealth. They are good abilities, but you do pay extra points for them. Sometimes it's not necessarily worth doing that. If you have a very tight list, then you can't really afford that extra 1 or 2 points, but do bear in mind that those options are always there, so think about them when you're choosing your Orc Trooper. As for the basic combi rifles, boarding shotguns, I don't really think they're worth it. The Orc really excels at the long-range stuff. He's a static kind of piece that is going to be just relying on his ballistic skill and armor, and he starts in your deployment zone. It's better to take a longer range gun with him if you can. And I really wouldn't go for the Orc Hacker. He's Willpower 12, BTS 3, not the best. You pay a lot of points for him, and it just makes him a lot more vulnerable to enemies with pitchers and killer hackers, so don't grab that profile. The Aquila Guard. So I have been talking about the FTO Specialist Operative, which I think is the best choice here. The fact that you can put him into a link team makes him very, very useful, and all of the other, the other option here of the heavy machine gun, which I would have taken a lot in the previous edition, just doesn't have armor piercing. And in the new edition, people are taking heavier troopers, taking tags more often, and with the crit mechanic not causing an automatic wound anymore, it just becomes really nasty when you're shooting into a tag, and the tag saving with armor 11, for example, and that means that they're passing on 5+. So the heavy machine gun might just take too long to tear them down, whereas the multi-marksman rifle does that a lot quicker with AP. And then there's the lieutenant option, which again, I mean, unless you're going to take a bolt chain of command, I'd really just prefer the specialist operative, because not only is he a specialist for button pressing, but joining that link team just makes him so much better. He really is a decent unit now for NCA, so if you love the model and you love the idea of him, definitely recommend this profile. The other profiles, I just don't quite feel cut it as much. Maybe the HMG, but again, for the reasons I mentioned, I'd go with the multi-marksman rifle more often than not. Diva Functionaries. So this is an Aleph unit which NCA has access to. I don't really see the benefit of it, to be honest. You have some things like the Diva bot and the hacker and things like that, sensor abilities. NCA kind of has access to those sorts of things anyway. So you have the Auxilia teams, you have the Peacemaker, you have the Pathfinder for sensor. The Diva's resilience I don't feel like is that relevant because you can just take heavy infantry models in this faction. Yes, you can take a lieutenant, which is willpower 15. That's not a bad option, but you do pay so many points for that lieutenant option there. And the extra 2 or 3 points of willpower, I'm not too sure if that's worth doubling the cost of your lieutenant. Overall, an NCA lieutenant is likely to be a Fusilier or an Auxilia trooper a lot of the time, or maybe a Bolt lieutenant, but forking out for the Diva lieutenant, I'm just not too sure if it's worth it. These guys, at first glance, don't look like they can go on a fire team. I'm seeing number 2 written there, but unless there's a mistake in the army builder, I'm just not seeing any Harris or fire team core here. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but this would actually be kind of a useful unit if you could add it into a link team. For example, the MSV2 Spitfire, that's pretty good in a link team, but again, if you really want MSV2, you would be taking the MSV3 guy who's got, a much better gun for that kind of thing, and obviously much better stats for that kind of thing. So there you go. Really good willpower on this unit, and that's something the NCA doesn't have access to, but I just don't know if you can justify the points for it. So there you go. The Swiss Guard used to be a real powerhouse of a unit back in N3, especially early N3, but I feel like the power creep in this game has kind of been unkind to the Swiss Guard. The level of hacking we're seeing in the game is even nastier now. The level of close combat is even nastier now if he does move into the midfield. His lack of a long-range armor-piercing gun really kind of hurts him. I mean, the missile launcher is armor-piercing, but it's only one burst. HMG is just not going to be great at cutting down an enemy avatar, an enemy cutter, a Knight of Justice or Grenzer and a link team, that kind of opponent. He can still try and he can still do it sometimes, but the points you pay to try and achieve that, I feel like you'd be better off going one of the other routes we just talked about, which is the Aquila Guard FTO, or maybe the Bulleteer, or the Neo-Terra Bolts multi-sniper, for example. These are things which get the job done. The Swiss Guard now kind of struggles a little bit. As an ARO piece with the missile launcher, yes, I think that is the profile that if you're going to consider one of these guys, take the missile launcher overall. That's going to be a nasty surprise on some battlefields. Your opponent just won't be expecting it. They won't have an answer to it. Or even if they do have an answer to it, they might be able to knock him unconscious and you can revive him with a trauma dock later. He does have a cube for that. Armor 5 is really powerful. He does benefit from the change in the crit mechanic. So yeah, please, go with the Swiss Guard missile launcher if you're going to get one at all. I really don't recommend the multi-rifle hacker, even though he's a specialist and he's good mid-range. You're just so vulnerable against killer hackers, which are fairly common in this game. I wouldn't recommend it. And moving into the midfield, you just don't want to be in a position where you're just ripped up by a tiger creature from Combined Army or Uberfall Commandos, models like that. They're just... We're just seeing those kinds of units in the meta a bit more these days, and I just don't like the idea of your Swiss Guard moving out into the midfield and having to hang out there in that kind of environment. So it's still a very reasonable unit. If you want to take one, the missile launcher is my recommendation. The Squalo has unfortunately been nerfed a little bit, but only for the profile where you have the grenade launcher. This used to be it. So previously in N3 you'd take him specifically for that profile, because at Ballistic Skill 15 you just get out into a nice good zero range band and you start lobbing those grenades and blowing them up. The profile range band, I believe, has changed, so it's a little bit less reliable on the grenade launcher. But still, overall, he's a very good tag because he's Armor 8, Ballistic Skill 15, and because the new changes in the rules have become so kind to that kind of unit, I really do recommend taking tags much more often than before. ECM Guided is very useful because guided missiles are a thing now. ECM Hacker is very useful because, again, pitches and total control is a thing. You want to have defenses against that. Tactical awareness is just a standard with tags now. And the profile that I think people are taking most often and that I would recommend is actually the NCO profile, because then you're taking a tag which you can afford it, and you're actually doing something useful with your lieutenant order, and usually the lieutenant order is just going to be locked up with a Fusilier or an Auxilia trooper or a bolt or something like that, which is never going to spend the lieutenant order. It's got nothing to do with it. Whereas the Squalo, you can spend the lieutenant's order to move and shoot, and the tactical awareness order to move and shoot, and then you start burning the regular orders, and it gives them a bit more reach, a bit more range, and that's so important for moving your tag into positions where it can kill things, but even more importantly, moving it back to a position where it's not going to die. I've seen so many games where a less experienced player has just gotten trigger happy, moved out with their big robot, shot a couple of things, not really done very much, and then their opponent, when they start their turn, just surround it or get into close combat with it or just shoot it because it was just out of position. So don't do that, guys. Be careful with your tag, and the NCO option helps you to retreat with it after doing a bit of damage, so that's the profile I'd recommend. Still really good unit in my opinion. Okay, Garuda TAC bots. So this is another Aleph unit which you can take in NCA. I'm finding it a little bit more difficult in N4 to make really good use of parachutists and drop troopers because your opponent tends to expect them a little bit more. Your opponent at the start of every game is going to be counting your list and just seeing how many of those 15 slots are already visible on the table. And if you've kept something off the board, they're going to be thinking, well, is it a Swiss Guard or is it a Garuda or what? And if they're worried it's a Swiss Guard, they're going to be counting up your special weapons costs. They're going to be counting up how many points roughly you've got on the table. And if they see a lot missing, then they'll assume a Swiss Guard. But if they only see a little bit missing, they may predict the Garuda. And the problem with that then becomes, well, if they've set up like flash pulses and hacking and things, where are you even going to land this guy? Because hacking's more common now than it used to be, you see a lot of factions with these little repeater bots with flash pulse bots and sensor bots and things with repeaters inbuilt in them, and one or two regular hackers in the list. And if your Garuda comes on the table too close to one of those, it's just going to get hacked and hit by Oblivion or a Carbonite straight away. So I think these guys are more difficult to get away with, and I'd actually recommend them less as a result of that consideration. Having said that, if you just look at them in a vacuum and just look at them purely on their stats, they are very, very good because they've got mimetism and they have more speed. Both of those rules are very, very good. They can benefit from assisted fire if you start them closer to one of your robots, and all of the guns are decent here. You've even got a forward observer option, and for just 20 points, this guy's an absolute steal. So yeah, if you really want to take the Garuda on your list, think about how you're going to play it. Think about maybe bringing it on a bit closer to your side of the table, or even just deploying it normally. I mean, you can do that. Just deploy it normally in your deployment zone, put assisted fire on it, and run it up the board because it's very quick. I mean, it's like a Bulleteer even. The only difference between this and a Bulleteer is that the Bulleteer is mimetism -6, whereas this is only -3. But you can still buff it up the same way with assisted fire, and it's still just as fast, and it's a smaller footprint, similar number of points. So there is that, and I think that's actually not a terrible idea against an opponent who you think will be definitely ready for it with a lot of bits and pieces. And don't be afraid to be a bit restrained and patient with it as well. If you think your opponent's got a trap ready for it, just wait until turn 2 or 3 before bringing it on. Or you could even try to drop it on the table, but with physical 11, it's not likely. Well, it's not not very reliable at landing, let's just say that. The humble trauma doc can't join a link team, but it's well worth taking if you are, I mean, inevitably you're going to be running something like a Bolt multi-sniper or a Aquila Guard or a Swiss Guard. Anything with wounds value that has a really important heavy weapon on it, you're going to need to take a trauma doc in your list because it becomes so much more efficient to bring it back after it's gone unconscious rather than just, you know, writing that off as a loss. And the trauma doc is cheap enough that it just counts as just a specialist cheerleader. Hang it back at the back of your army, which might not do much in your deployment zone, but if you are going to be taking a heavy infantry trooper or a bolt with a heavy weapon, I would really recommend taking a trauma doc. The machinist, similar kind of thing, but you only want the machinist if you're going to be taking stuff with structure points, and in this faction, you almost always are going to be doing that. The Bulleteer, the Peacemaker, the TR bots, the Pathfinder, the Fugazis, these are all things you'll regularly take. If you take a tag at all, a Squalo or the Ulan, you're going to want the machinist. So many NCA lists are going to have this guy. I would really recommend buying that box set, which comes with one trauma doc, one machinist, and the 2 Palbots. That package to purchase is a must if you're going to play this sectorial. If you're playing vanilla Pano, you might be able to get away with not even getting it because you're going to have a Monstrucker a lot of the time. But if you're going to be a career Pano player, for lack of a better word, and play all the sectorials, I mean, you're going to want that box set because the Trauma Doc machinists are so valuable to PanOceania. Now, the important thing is this, the NCA version, which has Bioimmunity and Veteran. The 1 point you pay for those abilities isn't really very useful. Bioimmunity and Veteran do come up, and they are useful, but for 1 point, it's a bit iffy. The real value of this guy is the fact that he can join a fire team of bolts, and he's much cheaper than a bolt. So, in this sectorial, you are much more likely to be taking this choice than this choice. And don't forget, the fire team can be a Harris or a Core. So we go back up with the bolts, we take, I don't know, a Spitfire and a chain of command, and suddenly we've got a group of 3, which might just be your fire team Harris, and then you go to the Fusiliers and you take a bunch of those and your Aquila Guard, and that might be what your army looks like. You have the small group of 3, which is quite efficient on its own, or a group of 5. And in fact, what's more likely is that you actually have your Bulleteer joining this other group up here. So you've got the 3-man team with the Bolt and Bulleteer. This is a Bolt Harris. The machinist joins that. And then if you're trading your Bulleteer with an enemy trooper in the middle of the table and it dies, the machinist has been brought along with your team to revive it. Really, really important. That can be such an effective play as just moving up midfield. Bulleteer springs the trap, blasts them close range, gets hit by a chain rifle, goes down, machinist then revives it. I do want to give you guys the tip, though, that you can't really control your Palbot while you're in the link team. And if your plan was to have a Palbot elsewhere to revive a tag or something like that, it just gets a bit trickier if you're planning on moving the Bolt further up the table by doing that. So just watch out that you may not be able to benefit from the Palbot if the engineer is in the link team, is what we're trying to say there. Pathfinder. So this is a generic bot. So many factions have access to this exact same unit. It's not bad. It's willpower 13, and a lot of Pano units have only willpower 12. So if you want a slightly more reliable specialist, this is why the Pathfinder tends to be used a bit more in PanOceania compared to some of the other factions. For example, I don't see the Sensor Bot being used as often in Nomads and Hakislam, just because they've got a lot of other troops which are better for button pressing and discovering stuff, whereas PanOceania struggles a bit with button pressing, struggles a bit with revealing camo markers and discovering stuff. So that's why the Pathfinder can be very, very good. Can't join a link team, but doesn't need to, and it is very, very useful trooper. If you're a new player, go and read up on what triangulated fire actually does. You might be surprised as to how effective it can actually be in some places in the game. So it's a very useful piece. It's a little bit expensive, more expensive than a normal bot or a normal guy with a combi rifle. especially since it doesn't have mimetism compared to the Fugazis, but it's a very useful unit, so definitely consider it in your lists. And again, you want to be purchasing enough boxes of robots. You could have at least 4 in your collection, because they're going to be used in list after list after list, and will just be so valuable in your time playing Infinity with a faction like this. So the Sierra Dronebot is another piece that can be represented by the aforementioned robots that we'll buy in that box set. This is just your basic total reaction bot. It's useful in just about every faction. It's good in the active turn and in the reactive turn. My only tip with the bot is that if you're going to take one, it's probably good that you've got the Machinist in your list as well, with a couple of Palbots, because the idea of the Sierra Drone bot is to slow the enemy down, cost them some orders. It's probably going to get shot to bits with an enemy that has some mods like surprise attack, mimetism, that kind of thing, shooting through a smoke cloud. And you'll be at a penalty, and if you don't crit, you don't get lucky, your bot's going to go down, but remote presence means that it's not going to be removed from the board, and it's going to be prone behind like a wall area, so you can then revive it. And then in your active turn, sometimes you're going to be shooting with it. I don't think it's a good idea to overdo it with lots of troopers that have HMGs. So for example, if you're going to take a couple of these guys and a Swiss Guard HMG and, you know, a Fusilier HMG, you're just taking too many of the same gun, and as soon as the battlefield turns out to be one where, you know, you're having to engage the enemy at short range, you're having to move around a lot, you're a little bit less efficient. So yeah, you definitely take 2 of these if you want to, but just think about what other guns are being used in your list and what's supporting them. Nothing wrong with taking 2 of them in an NCA list. Just make sure you've got the Machinist backup, and you've got other guns like a sniper rifle, you've got boarding shotguns, you've got other things which can complement it. The Clipper Drone bot, again, can't join a link team. It's a much better piece now that we have Spotlight in the game. But the thing is, NCA is not really a powerful hacking faction. We don't have any pitchers, we don't have many good deployable repeaters, and the basic hackers in this faction aren't very good at doing that because of their willpower. So I wouldn't actually recommend taking the Clipper. Yes, obviously the firepower is there, but you're playing a faction which just has so many other straightforward, brutal ways of just bowling them over with guns. The Clipper is not really the answer. The Clipper is something that you want to be taking in some of the mercenary factions like Druze, where you can, you know, actually support it with a bit of guided fire and forward observing. Again, NCA doesn't really have any, you know, A-class forward observers out in the midfield which can actually put an enemy in targeted state either. I mean, they can do it, it's just that they're not really known for that. I mean, the Locusts can't be a forward observer, and the other forward observers you can take sort of start in your deployment zone. I wouldn't really build a gameplay around that, game plan around that, you know? I mean, if you're desperately wanting to play Infinity that way, you've come to the wrong place. This is not really the faction that does that best. I'd recommend going to Combined Army or Druze or Nomads, that kind of thing. The Fugazi, you can take up to 3 of them, never forget that. I mean, if you're really going all in on PanOceania and specifically NCA, it might not be a bad idea to buy like 3 box sets of those new remotes, so you can have 3 Fugazis and 1 Pathfinder and 2 Sierra Drone bots. And I mean, some games you're going to use more than 4 robots. It's pretty crazy. So these guys at 7 points, they save you so many points elsewhere. They are an incredible ARO piece because they've got mimetism, and the flash pulse is hitting on 13s a lot of the time. A lot of enemies just can't ignore them unless they've got total immunity. And they just help to make the overall list a lot cheaper, because you're going to be taking a Machinist a lot of the time anyway, preferably with 1 or even 2 Palbots. These guys can be repaired, they sit back up again, they just become so extremely annoying. So any NCA list is going to have between 1 and 3 Fugazi drone bots. There's not much more really I can say about them. They are just really very important troops to have. I know that they're kind of boring, like they don't look that interesting or perform in a really interesting special way, but you kind of need them to support the rest of your fun guys. Auxiliars I actually really like because they come with this little orc spot guy, and that Orc Spot guy is expendable. And the idea is that you have your, little guy who's like a Fusilier back behind a wall. He provides the regular order, he's important, but then the bot is out further out into the deployment zone where it will come into contact with enemies first. So if they're moving into you with a impersonator or a Daylami or some sort of infiltrator, whatever it might be, the bot is going to be the first line of defense. You can throw out discovers, you can fire with your flamethrower, and it just means that your army is less likely to take, hull damage, so to speak, the really juicy stuff being ripped up. And I think that's so important to have that, because otherwise, as a PanOceania player, your list is a little bit too vulnerable against enemy attack pieces. They're going to alpha strike you and try to gut your order pool. Having little bots in front to dodge and fire flamethrowers and discovers are really, really important, which is why taking a couple of these is not a bad idea. What I like to do is to take the basic profile plus the lieutenant, and that way you have a decoy. So you have one on either side of the table. If your opponent is just going to make an all-in play to assassinate your lieutenant, that opponent is not going to know which one of your auxiliaries is the lieutenant, which sometimes deters people from trying that strategy, which is a good thing for you. These guys are reasonably cheap, so again, you have more points to spend on your other powerful guns. And again, those Orc spots really just help to defend your deployment zone, which I find so useful. The other way to go is to have a couple of these Fort Observers. Unfortunately, willpower 12 not the best, but as Fort Observers, you can actually press buttons with them and go out into the midfield and trade your Orc spot with enemy infiltrators while your auxiliary is pressing the button. So that can be good. Unfortunately, one of the weaknesses of NCA is that you're kind of lacking any really good infiltrator. We'll come to the Locusts later. They just aren't that hot, in my opinion. So sometimes you've got to rely on the stuff that starts your deployment zone. CSUs. So CSUs are another specialist choice, and again, with these guys being willpower 12, not great, but sometimes they're a little bit more useful for moving up and getting into defensive positions in the middle of the table, because Sixth Sense definitely gives them a bit of a leg up. Metachemistry can also be very helpful as well. So where the Auxilia is just your plain profile, BS11, the CSU has a little bit of an advantage there with BS12. Having a rifle and a light shotgun is very important, because you have the other options for, the range spans, and the light shotgun is very powerful for trading with an enemy with its template. But some of the time, you're just going to roll up something useful on this chart, like plus movement, or NWI, for example, or regeneration, or dogged and total immunity, and that's going to make the CSU much better at trading into them after it's gone out there and pressed some buttons. Far and away, the best profile that everybody takes is this one here, the Specialist Operative and the Rifle Light Shotgun, because it's the cheapest, and it's still just as good at pressing buttons, and the guns are very, very useful. I think the Breaker Combi Rifle and Nanopulsar +1 Burst is a little bit better, but for the extra 4 points, definitely not worth it. So my recommendation is always going to be the Rifle Light Shotgun. NCA kind of specializes in being able to take up to 3 hexes. I don't really see the point in taking all 3 of them. The most popular profile here is the multi-sniper, because it's in hidden deployment and can really ruin somebody's day if they just walk out into the open and you snipe them. It can be a little bit unreliable at just BS12, and it can be a bit flimsy once it's been revealed. It's sort of like a budget version of the Combined Army Noctifer, which is a much more powerful unit, if you ask me, because the Noctifer has a more powerful gun and it has dogged. But it's still kind of handy. This is also your go-to choice if you're going to take a hacker. So if you really want to have a hacking game, the fact that you're in marker state is important, or in hidden deployment that is, because your opponent can't preemptively wipe you out with a long-range pitcher to extend hacking area and then just rip you up with a killer hacker. So they can't do that. And this guy, once he's ready to strike, can move out midfield and start pressing buttons, start hacking the enemy, and possibly even making use of a repeater network if you've moved up with your Fugazis. The Spitfire, again, with Mimetism -6 and Surprise Attack, it is pretty strong. But I feel like the Bulleteer is going to be doing that better, because the Bulleteer can benefit from assisted fire and this can't. The Bulleteer can be in a link team and this can't. The Bulleteer is cheaper and this is more expensive. So although there's nothing bad about the Spitfire if you look at it in a vacuum, compared to the other options, I don't think it's the best. So yeah, if you really want to commit to a game, and again, I don't think hacking is the thing that this faction does best, you could take a bunch of guys here and just go all in on hexes, but I just don't really think that this is the way to do it. Think about taking a multi-sniper if you can afford it, but a lot of the time you might actually just make a list without any hexes at all. Next, the Clausewitz Ulans. So any tag that can go into marker state is good, in my opinion. Marker state stops it from being hacked, stops it from being hit by guided missiles, stops it from being destroyed in close combat. It's an extremely important defense mechanism for such a valuable and heavy piece. BS-15 makes the tag obviously very potent in the active turn, and the amazing thing is that it's got both the heavy machine gun and the Feuerbach, so it's actually pretty good. I do lament the fact that the heavy machine gun does not have armor piercing. I say this a lot in my commentaries. But the fact that you have a Feuerbach as well means that the tag becomes a lot more viable. If you really are up against that enemy Marut or something like that that just has a lot of armor, then maybe consider just going with the Feuerbach in the active turn rather than the HMG, because although you are burst 3 with a Feuerbach, because it's 2 dice active turn for DA AP rounds with the +1 burst on the profile, it gives you 3, and then it's 4 for the HMG. So even though you lose 1 burst, the armor piercing just makes all the difference if you're up against like a target that has armor 7 or 8 or 9, that kind of thing, or 10 if it's a Jotun. So this guy is actually pretty good. I like him. I like the model as well. Mimetism -3, obviously very, very valuable. 88 is a lot of points, so you definitely save on, what's-his-face, the Squalo. So come back to the Squalo, you take an NCO Squalo for 79, and then the Ulan is an entire 9 points extra and doesn't have NCO. And I think that's probably why you'd see the Squalo a bit more often than the Ulan. But the Ulan just is not bad. He's got the tools. Armor 6 is a bit of a shame. So if your opponent is firing at you with something like MSV1, AP, heavy machine gun, it's just going to be a bit of a shame that you're going to go down to armor 3 and he's going to crumble a lot more quickly than the Squalo will. But I think if you're careful with him, and if you are just a bit sharper with your tactics and your planning, this guy actually can be a bit more punishing than the Squalo, because he's got surprise attack and marker state, and the 2 really awesome gun options. So I like him. I think he's pretty decent. Aydah Swanson, though, unfortunately is not very decent. Nobody actually uses Aydah Swanson, I'm sorry to say. She just does not really offer enough for her points. You would really be better off with taking something that adds to your game plan a bit more. She is not a specialist. Even though she's got forward deployment, she just doesn't have enough forward deployment to really get into range of enemies where she can benefit from all of her really good close range stuff. So I'm sorry, you'd be really better off trying to invest in a Peacemaker or a Bulleteer or a Garuda, just something else which is a bit better at finding its range and finding its targets more efficiently than Aydah. I'm sorry to say, I want to like her, but there's a reason why nobody actually uses her. Bulleteers, they have always been excellent, they are still excellent, and they are just even better now that they can be in a fire team, and I feel like this is one of the main reasons to play NCAs, being able to bring the Bulleteer into your fire team, and his ability to win face-to-face rolls just goes through the roof. You can put assisted fire on him, and then you can put him in a link team. He's hitting them on 18s with his Spitfire. At close range with a heavy shotgun, it's going to be like 21s, pretty much. So that's kind of crazy. And of course, with the ability to bring your engineer along with your link team and repair him, that makes it even better. I can't recommend these guys enough. It's a shame if you run your NCA list without even one Bulleteer. It can be done. But again, they're just so good. Both profiles are excellent here. If you've already got a really good gun, like the Bolt Spitfire, the multi-marksman rifle Aquila, something like that, you may not need the Bolt Spitfire. If you don't have one of those aforementioned units, then probably should take the Spitfire. But if you're not taking the Spitfire, take the heavy shotgun instead. He's just going to hang around, and then as you move out with your team and just set up camp, the Bulleteer is going to be the thing that takes the damage first. Don't make him the link leader, just have him hanging out, ready to trade with them, and he will often be worth his points. Peacemakers are also very, very good. These are guys which, again, can slow the enemy down with an Orc spot. They also have a repeater. If you are going to be investing in that Hexa Killer Hacker, for example, that's where you might be able to extend the range of your hacker. But, yeah, the ability to deploy out in the middle of the table is useful. His ability to trade with the enemy is very, very good. I think that the heavy shotgun profile is possibly the better one, because now that the way that shotguns have changed with N4 means that if your opponent dodges, you can just blast them with the heavy shotgun rounds point blank and then fire the flamethrower from the Orc spot at the same time. But if they shoot back at you and they happen to be a really valuable target, like the enemy's lieutenant or just something really important, you can lay down both heavy shotgun templates and the heavy flamer template, and they're suddenly taking 3 saves at that point, meaning this guy's ability to trade with something important is pretty crucial. Like if you're up against like a Norkius or a Shishkin or something like that, the Peacemaker actually presents a massive threat to an enemy like that, and he's worth half of their points. So I think this is a really solid choice, and a very cost-effective one at that. Palbots, inevitably you're going to be taking Palbots. This is a faction that likes to watch the table with things and put up arrows, especially the remotes. So if you are going to be taking 1 or 2 Palbots, I would recommend it. And it's more likely you'll be assigning the Palbot to be a peripheral of your engineer as opposed to your doctor, unless of course you've got one sniper and a Harris over here and another sniper or Feuerbach or something in your core team, in which case you want to sort of spread that doctoring ability out. But the thing is, that core team might have a paramedic in it, and the Harris might have the doctor next to it, in which case you don't really need the Palbot. So you don't need it as much. So the engineer is probably going to be more likely to have 1 or 2 Palbots, and that's really going to help to allow you to win the attrition game, which is what NCA is often about. Mulebots. So the Evo Hacker is the one you'll be taking a fair bit because you can put assisted fire on your Bulleteer. If you are going to be running a Garuda or a Bulleteer Spitfire, especially a Bulleteer Spitfire, and especially if you've got both the Bulleteer Spitfire and some total reaction bots, really recommend the Evo Hacker because it's super cheap and the assisted fire is going to be helpful all game long in the active and reactive turn. The basic Mulebot here, I wouldn't take him as often because you're basically getting 7 points on the Fugazi and you can take up to 3 of them, but if you're really strapped for points, you might take 3 Fugazis and 1 Mulebot, and that really helps you out in the old cheerleader department where you're just saving every single penny. I don't think it's worth taking that TR guy, just because he's just 1 combi rifle and total reaction at that range just isn't really worthwhile enough. And I think that's verified from the fact that nobody, in my many years of playing, I've seen this guy. I've only seen 1 player try this guy out, and even then he wasn't. The performance of this unit wasn't wonderful. Bipandra is a special doctor that can join fire teams, and ordinarily I would say don't take her because the trauma doc is way cheaper. You save 6 points, and that's not nothing. That's a really significant number of points. However, if you are taking an expensive fire team like the Orc Troops, for example, so you got your Orc heavy machine gun up here, and then you've got your Bulleteer in there as well, so you've got your heavy shotgun, and for some reason your engineer wants to have the Palbots and not join the team. If you really wanted to, you could join here, and the idea of this team is that if the Orc Trooper goes down, Bipandra can heal him up, even if the Orcs moved out into the middle of the table, because Bipandra's come along with him. So that's the scenario where Bipandra can be worth it. If you're not going to be in that scenario, please don't include her in your list, because the trauma doc does save you all of those points, and honestly, 6 points for an extra point of willpower and an extra point of armor kind of thing. I mean, I know she's got some extra rules there, but honestly, 6 points is just too much. You just can't get away with that. The only reason to take Bipandra is to make a expensive link team cheaper, because she's replacing a model that would have otherwise cost 20 or 30 points, or 40. Warcores, obviously, again, if you are just running out of points and you need an extra order that can be converted into a regular order with a command token, the Warcore is still very, very good for that. The 360 visor option is my favorite, just because it helps to watch for any parachutists and stuff landing near your zones, which can be a thing. But yeah, overall, I mean, it's just another flash pulse. Flash pulses are still very powerful. Typically, your list is going to have so many Fugazis in it that you may not actually need a Warcore. But again, the Warcore is just 3 points, and that's why it's going to slot into some lists which are really just that tight. They just can't really afford anything else as that final unit. Locusts have never been a particularly good unit. They are a bit of a meme. I don't see people using them at all. And the problem with them is that you're a model that wants to make use of the infiltration rule, because you pay the points to have a guy with infiltration. So your Locusts are out in the midfield, but they're not protected by marker state. So anything with the Berserk ability, like a Tiger Creature or those Highlander guys, they're just going to kill the Locust very easily. Anything with Spotlight out in the midfield is just going to target them. A guided missile lands on their head, ignoring their mimetism. Yes, they're close combat 20, but a ninja walking up to them is going to be CC 23 with surprise attack and with martial arts, and your Locust is just going to get creamed. Sure, you can land drop bears and stuff with them, but again, drop bears and stuff can be cleared out by peripherals and by warbands, and sometimes just troops dodging and tags just tanking the hit. If you take either of the hackers, again, they're not protected by marker state, and any enemy killer hacker is just going to kill them. So because their position's always known and their profile's going to be known, the Mimetism 6 just doesn't help them enough. If you were just adamant about taking one, maybe the Shock Marksman Rifle, because you can sort of push in early game, try and get a really good spot on top of a building in the midfield, and try and shoot them in their deployment zone. That may work. The other profile, which is okay, is this one here. Boarding shotgun grenades, drop bears. You can try and deploy at the top of a building and use the speculative fire from the grenades or the drop bears to cause damage in the midfield. So either of those two profiles are, I think, the way you want to go. That is my recommendation there if you're going to go with Locusts. Blackfriars is another MSV2 unit. So if you really feel the need for MSV2 but you don't feel you can justify the Aquila Guard, and if you feel the MSV1 from the Bolt Sniper is not enough, this is where you want to be going. Unfortunately, PanOceania can't take smoke, so you can't combo the smoke cloud with your MSV2. Just doesn't, unfortunately, work. So I have a lot of trouble justifying this guy, but having said that, he can join these link teams, and that's where he kind of is useful. So if you ever are going to be using a Blackfriar, I think it's the link team guy with a multi-rifle that you want to go with. The Albedo kind of gives him a bit more of a tool, makes him worth, taking. He actually has a job to do. Your opponent might be running something like a Marut, and if you can creep up the field and you start shooting that Marut with your multi-rifle, the Albedo creates a white noise zone that sort of penalizes that unit. There are going to be other sort of 3-man link teams that have MSV1 or 2 with a rocket launcher or a sniper or something where you can do that. So he's not terrible. He's really decent, and as you bring him along with your link team, you can throw out the drop bears as well. So if you're going to be taking a Blackfriar, take that one. I know that the Military Orders model just released with a heavy rocket launcher, but honestly, the rocket launcher guy, compared with other guns you can take in this faction, I just don't think so. For those kind of points, you'd probably be better off going with the Hexa Sniper. The link teamable guy is where it's at. Discover +3 is also kind of handy too, because if you don't have that Aquila Guard, Discover +3 is going to be useful against some of those enemy pieces that just sort of want to let you discover them to waste time, and you don't want to be, you know, failing your discover rolls and then not being able to sort of move past them and come out of cover. Alrighty, Tech B. I think the Tech B is an excellent unit because you really suffer from the willpower of your engineer in this faction, and your engineer is just going to be doing so much work reviving all of those robots, the TR bot, the Bulleteer, everything, and this Tech B specialist operative thing. Unless they've changed the rules on me. In fact, it might be a N3 thing only that you actually get +1 willpower by having the Tech B on the battlefield. Either way, even without that ability, the Tech B is only 5 points. You can spend the command token to turn her irregular order into a regular, which is helpful, and the fact you're a specialist is also very good for so few points. And even the flash pulse there to defend herself means that she is playing a role in the game and making her presence known. Obviously, don't build your list around her, but if all the space in your list you've got left is like 5 points, then that's where you want to be taking her. Richard Quinn is another wild card, and again, NCA has become so much better because of the wild cards you've got. There's Shona Carano, there's Richard Quinn, there's the Blackfriars, there's the Bulleteer, there's the Aquila Guard. So that's given you so much more choice of forming these interesting fire teams, which is why the replayability and the options of this sectorial have become so much more rewarding and interesting. This guy is, I mean, similar to the Blackfriar. He's got MSV, but only MSV 1, so he's a little bit like a Bolt in that regard. Unfortunately, the Bolt has marksmanship and he doesn't, but he's still nice and cheap. So he's the kind of model that can join a Fusilier link team like we were talking about before. So if you've got the sort of setup here, a couple of basic guys, including a lieutenant and a paramedic, you've still got quite a nice cheap team. And if you then move out later on, Quinn can be the point man. He's got an extra point of ballistic skill in MSV1 and a slightly more powerful gun. So even though you've got an extremely cheap team, you can move out and get a lot of damage done that way. And this is exactly the kind of link team that you might want to add a Bulleteer Spitfire to. And then you go on to have your Harris, which would then have something like, I don't know, an Orc Trooper with HMG in it, or Feuerbach, and then something else like Shona Carano that are in there. And you could even take a second bullet here because it's AVA 2. So then you've got the shotgun. Or even Bipandra. So what you could do is put Bipandra in with the Orc, for example. And then if Richard Quinn goes down, you've got the paramedic for him. So this is the kind of thing you can achieve with NCA now, which I find quite appealing. Just going to make this a bit smaller. And Richard Quinn just offers something to either of these little groups that they don't already have. So there's no MSV featured in this group. Richard Quinn adds that. There's no shock ammunition in here. Richard Quinn adds that. So for his points, I think he's very, very reasonable. And he's even a specialist as well. So sometimes you're going to be hitting them with a flash pulse and react return instead of the shock marksman rifle if you really want to stun them. So he's not bad at all. Uma Sorensen, though, unfortunately, she's a bit too expensive. Her guns are just, I mean, they're short range. They are good at short range, but paying above 30 points for a model that's going to be trying to get into a position to get that damage done, I really say no to this unit. I mean, it's yet another model which can join any fire team. So you're spoiled for choice with the wildcards, which is why I recommend NCA. I think it's a really, really fun sectorial. But, I mean, the points you pay here, I mean, compared to that Bulleteer, the Bulleteer's also got 1 wound. The Bulleteer's similar ballistic skill, but of course it can have assisted fire. It has mimetism -6 rather than 3. It's got a longer range gun if you go for the Spitfire. Just can't justify her. I'm sorry, guys. She just is not good enough. It's kind of not fair because Nomad's got Jazz and Billy, which are, you know, top 10 unit in the game kind of thing. And Uma Sorensen is just unusable because of that price tag. If she was closer to Richard Quinn, like in the low 20s, that's when I'd be looking at her and going, maybe, you know, maybe as a lieutenant or something, the FTO, just not worth it. I think she should have like tactical awareness. I think that would be a really useful thing for her to have and allow her to play a role in the team and add something to them. And then lastly, Shona Carano. I think Shona's an important unit for NCA because nothing else in NCA has really good close combat ability like she does. Nothing else has amazing dodging ability like she does. So she's bringing something to the army which you just don't have otherwise. There will be some games you play where the enemy has just entrenched themselves with a very powerful unit that really can't be dealt with other than at short range, and Shona is going to be the only option you have to kill them. You might be in a game where, I don't know, your lieutenant is in close combat with Norkius because he's dodged into close combat with his very last order, or maybe Shishkin, and in desperation you want to try and kill that target without accidentally killing your Fusilier lieutenant at the same time. Well, that's where Shona Carano moves in. She gets the burst bonus from the helper in the team, and MA4 kind of gives her a chance, and she might be able to get you out of a nasty scenario. Also, think about this. If you have your Orc Trooper and Bipandra moving up the field and the enemy just throws an Eclipse Grenade at their feet, means you just can't get your amazing firepower to bear on the enemy target. Well, Shona Carano can actually then move into that smoke cloud and rip them up with her sword. And that's a really, really important feature of this, is that if your opponent is defending that way, you have a tool for it. And don't forget the new errata as well does allow you to declare a close combat attack first without being able to see your opponent. They have to choose something like dodge, or whatever it might be, and then you move into base contact and actually swing the sword at the end of the resolution of the order. That's something you can do, and nothing else in the sectorial really has anything like that. I mean, Locusts are okay in close combat, but really just nothing to write home about. Everything else here is just really subpar for close combat. So Shona, excellent piece. I would highly recommend her. She doesn't have to go on a link team. She can run off by herself, but given that she can join a link team, I say, why the hell not? She's actually got some guns as well. Sometimes that SMG or like Nanopulsar +1 burst is going to be what you use. And for her points, I think she's worth it. I mean, she's just incredible at dodging as well. So if your opponent is moving very close to your position and she continues dodging, you might just be able to passively dodge into close combat with them and shut down their push, which can be huge. So all in all, very interesting sectorial. Let me know what kind of fun fire teams you guys have been building. I think that this is a sectorial which has been designed a lot better than it was in the past. There are so many more choices, and I may not have even found the optimal choices in this video. So I hope you guys have a good time with NCA, and yeah, let me know what you think.